All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Faith in Home Buying. I'm sitting here equipping people of faith for the home buying process. But most importantly, I guess education has been the key for these last couple of episodes. And, if you caught any of my last ones, it was dealing with housing discrimination, kind of the subtleties of that, what that is, what it looks like, right? But then also, too, how to spot different things. And, if you do find yourself in that situation, what it means. And then talking about equal opportunity towards housing and some of the Fair Housing Acts that, that were passed in order to make sure that, everyone across the board can have equal access to home ownership, because, we all know, or at least some of us do, hopefully you do, that home ownership is one of the fastest ways to produce generational wealth for not only yourself, but your familial line and those that came before you and those coming after you, right? In talking to today, we're going to discuss the topic of redlining. I figured I needed to go a little bit more in depth on what actually took place, because a lot of people don't know. And I myself, even before getting into, real estate, we had to study for things, and then noticing whoa, this is actually a thing. Like they really did segregate certain areas and, did not loan on certain areas. So diving a little bit deeper today, we're going to talk about that. But first, I think it's just so important. And, I talk about this all the time as far as, wisdom, knowledge, just revelation, right? And, what is wisdom? Wisdom is the quality of having a good judgment, right? Based on knowledge. Okay. And it's popularly known as the ability to discern. So if knowledge is power, wisdom is your choice to use or apply that power. Understanding is the ability to understand one's knowledge and choices. It is the realization of your decision. And, it's fitting that, a lot of the things that I'm reading with regards to redlining, kind of the things and laws, literally governmental laws that were set into place, maybe it was a lack of understanding and knowledge. However, when that knowledge and that understanding and probably a lot more spotlight shining on these areas and saying, hey, this is not right and these things need to change, then the laws started to change and equal access to, home ownership was a possibility, right? And it just kind of reminds me, I was reading in Proverbs 11:9, the teachings of hypocrites can destroy you, but revelation knowledge will rescue the righteous. The blessing that rests on the righteous releases strength and favor to the entire city. But shouts of joy will be heard when the wicked one dies. The blessing of favor resting upon the righteous influences a city to lift it higher, but wicked leaders tear it apart by their words. And so, looking even at that verse and seeing that, we've come a long way as far as, the laws that have been passed and what we now are able to enjoy across the board, whether that be Black, white, Asian, it doesn't matter. However, it is something that is always prevalent. And I say that because, being out here as a realtor, I get the distinct opportunity to experience, in certain areas where you look and you see, it's called covenants, codes, and restrictions. Okay. Covenants, codes, and restrictions are found in the, your preliminary report, which is given from the title company, which is, covenants, codes, restrictions. They're maybe decrees or restrictions that the builder puts on particular lands or homes or communities that either people can live in, whether it be like how high your home can be built, you're in the setback from the front of the house to the front of your door, or different business can be conducted there, how many people can live in a household, or if you can have businesses conducted on the street. Okay, so it goes and it breaks down the different ways in which the builder has designed that community, right? And a lot of the covenants and codes and restrictions in certain prominently Caucasian areas, those areas, it actually says on there some kind of incriminating words, and it just kind of keeps continuing on like, hey, this was actually a part of something that wasn't Right. And, there was a study, there was a story in 2019, like really recently, and I've seen it myself, but I think it was Yolanda Romero and Isai Menzo. They were house hunting, in the home area of Stockton. It was the Colonial Heights neighborhood, right? And the home met everything on the checklist. And so when they went and they saw the different covenant codes and restrictions, they noticed that it had this verbiage on it. And I've seen this verbiage, and this verbiage is, if you kind of look at your own paperwork, you might see it as well. But it states literally that no persons other than those wholly of the white Caucasian race shall use, occupy, or reside upon any part of or within any building located on the above described real property, except servants or domestics of another race employed by or domiciled by a white Caucasian owner or tenant. And which was really interesting, because I've seen this on several occasions, and it was kind of shocking, because a lot of people think that, hey, wait a minute, like, is this still in play? Well, no, it's not still in play, because laws were passed that forbid that. However, it's just a really, really it's a really prevalent reminder that not all things were equal at that time, and it's not that long ago. And so what I'm about to talk about today was, it wasn't that long ago. And as a matter of fact, there's probably people still alive that kind of remember that and that could talk about it. My, grandparents, grandmother had recently passed away, and, she was mentioning, certain things. Luckily, my family, they were able to purchase in areas, for instance, in Oakland, right up off of High Street, and in pretty decent areas. And at that time, my grandfather had, purchased property. So I was able to see my grandparents' parents or homeowners, myself, my brothers as well. And so, and getting to see that it was really something that when you did it, and just the pride of just the ownership, the pride of being able to own inside of a community, inside of an area, so that you could pass it along to your kids, and so that you have a sense of ownership in a community, a stake in America. It was important. It was really important. But let's not forget that there are ways in which the U.S. government segregated America. No joke. And this is, I think, the knowledge and the understanding. When you see, for instance, certain neighborhoods, right? And you wonder, okay, well, why is there so much crime in that area? Or why are, there's so many people of one race that's in this area? Don't they know how to, move out? Or why are they in the ghetto? Or, if you take a step back versus, first from the judgment aspect of it, and actually dig deep to see why, you'd be surprised that in a lot of ways, a lot of this was set up from the beginning. And when you look at, for instance, in like 1933, after the Great, Depression, we were faced with a housing shortage. And the federal government actually began a program that explicitly was designed to increase and segregate America's housing stock. Didn't know that, right? But this is coming from author Richard Rothstein, and he wrote the book, The Color of Law. And I encourage you to kind of check it out. But here are some things in coming from that book and what he's talked about, which is very riveting. He says that the housing programs began under the New Deal, that they were tantamount to a state-sponsored system of segregation. Okay. He also states that the government's efforts were primarily designed to provide housing to white middle-class, lower middle-class families. He says that African Americans and other people of color were left out of this new suburban communities and pushed instead into urban housing projects. So think about this. In 1933, historians were talking about this. And so you wonder why in certain areas that there's certain, kind of segregations, there's just, hidden lines of, you don't go there, you go here. And no, if you're not of this particular ethnicity, you don't go here. Well, there's a reason why. So in his book, of The Color of Law, he examines the local, state, and federal housing policies and mandated segregation. And he also notes that the Federal Housing Administration, which was established in like 1934, the FHA, which is really interesting because a lot of my clients, and, I deal with a plethora of people, but a lot of my clients, buyers, they do go through and actually utilize FHA loans. So it's interesting now, right? But anyway, so the FHA, Federal Housing Administration, was established in 1934, but it furthers the segregation efforts by refusing to insure mortgages in and near African-American neighborhoods. And that was a policy known as redlining. And so this is what today's topic is, about. It's in the 30 minute section. I might kind of probably divide it into about two parts and probably finish the rest of the part next week. But I think it's important to understand, where we're at. And, a lot of people are just not having knowledge of why certain things are the way that they are. And they ask questions. And you know what? Hey, I think this is a great time for knowledge and information and to educate ourselves. And so that we can understand one another and we can understand cities and we can understand to pray, better about, our communication and our lines of understanding with each other. Right. And so that's one of the reasons today that we're going to cover some more on the redlining and just to understand, how segregated parts of America now they're changing. That's true. There's a lot of areas that we call it gentrification, a lot of areas that are changing. And what was once one thing, is now another. But there were literally times in which the government stepped in, either putting freeways in order to divide areas just so that segregation could take place. We'll talk about that a little bit, but thank you very much for joining for the first half. Get ready for the second half. In a second, this is Tamika Ellsworth, and Faith in Homebuying. I'm equipping people of faith for the home buying process and spreading some knowledge and information at that. So stay tuned. When we come back, we'll finish our discussion.
This is Faith in Homebuying, equipping people of faith for the home buying process. Once again, your host, Tamika Ellsworth.
All right, so back again to finish where I started and talking about redlining. And, it is something that has affected not only that just the housing industry, but just, neighborhoods across the United States, right? And so redlining, which is known as a policy of segregating areas, and redlining literally maps redlining areas in which people can live of different ethnicities and colors. And I was just talking about the FHA, which is the Federal Housing Administration, which a lot of my clients utilize now, which is completely interesting. But at the same time, the FHA was subsidizing builders who were mass producing entire subdivisions for whites, and with the requirement that none of the homes be sold to African Americans. So now this is out of the book, The Color of Law. And I totally encourage you to read this book. But Richard Rothstein, who, historian, went into depth and came across a lot of the issues that that I'm reading and that I'm talking about today, and needed to kind of say that, hey, there was a reason why these particular things happen, and just to kind of let people know that, hey, look, there's a history of this that the U.S. government did, and we should really take a look at it, right? He states in the book that these decades-old housing policies, they have lasted. Had a lasting effect on American society. So the segregation of our metropolitan areas today, it led to stagnant inequality, because families are much less able to upwardly mobile when they're living in segregated neighborhoods where opportunity is absent. And if we want greater equality in the society, and if we want a lowering of the hostility between police, and we see what we're going through now, and young African-American men, we need to take steps to desegregate. And so, again, this is in his book, and I think it was out in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. But again, a lot of the things that we're seeing are direct results of the things that I think people had maybe good intentions. However, those intentions led to harm, especially in dealing with cities. So, which is interesting. So the Federal Housing Administration, the justification for redlining was that if African Americans bought homes in these suburbs, or even if they bought homes near the suburbs, the property values of the homes they were insuring, that the white homes that they were insuring, would decline, and therefore their loans would be at risk. So this is what the FHA was saying, and the reason why they would not loan. Although there was no basis for the claim in the part of the Federal Housing Administration, they didn't do any tests, nor was it something that was valid. But in fact, when it was an actual study that when African Americans tried to buy homes in all white neighborhoods, or mostly white neighborhoods, property values actually rose because African Americans were more willing to pay more for properties than whites were, simply because the housing supply was so restricted and they had so many fewer choices. So the rationale that the Federal Housing Administration used, it was really never a basis of any type of study, nor was it based on any type of reality. Interesting, right? So the term, redlining, right? So what does that come from? It comes from the development by the New Deal. Okay, so by the federal government of maps of every metropolitan area in the country. Okay, and so these maps were color coded first by the Homeowners Loan Corp, and then the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, and then adopted by the Veterans Administration. So that's a whole nother ballgame too, and I may get into that into another segment. But the VI, the GI Bill for veterans, I deal a lot with them. That was actually affected too. Men coming back from war thinking they had their GI benefits in order for home ownership, they got met with a rude awakening because of the very things that redlining was doing. Okay, so that's a whole nother thing. But the color codes were designed to indicate where it was safe to insure mortgages. Okay, and anywhere where African Americans lived nearby were colored red. To indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky to insure mortgages. Redlining. Was wearing my red shirt. It was really, really a thing. Okay. And it was in something called, I think it was called the Underwriting Manual of the Federal Housing Administration. And it said that incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, meaning that loans to African Americans could not be insured. All right. And I was reading that there was one development in Detroit. And so in one development in Detroit, the FHA would not go ahead during World War II with the development unless the developer built a 6-foot-high wall, a cement wall separating the development from a nearby African-American neighborhood to make sure that no African-Americans could even walk into that neighborhood. That's how segregated that they wanted these neighborhoods to be. And also the underwriting manual of the FHA, it recommended that highways, and we can kind of see this now, I'll get to that, but highways be a good way to separate African-Americans from white neighborhoods. So this was not even a matter of law, it was a matter of government regulation, but it wasn't hidden, so it can't be claimed that this was some kind of de facto situation, right? Regulations that were written in law and published in the underwriting manual are as much a de jure unconstitutional expression of government policy as something that was actually written into law. And, truth be told, let's look at our own, community, especially in the Bay Area. One, for instance, you look at, the separation of Menlo Park and, the upper part of Menlo Park, the separation that you have in one side where East Palo Alto is on versus the other side that, Palo Alto is on. There is a distinct, and you have Highway 101 separating those. And that was done purposely to separate the areas of East Palo Alto from Palo Alto and, where the redlining had happened. And you can see it distinctly on where 101 is. And there's you can see it up, what street is that? It's going towards 101. They've changed kind of the freeway a little bit, but still, they put the freeway in there to separate those areas. And specifically, you find that home prices in those areas are, at least $50,000 to $100,000 in difference. So on one side, on the Palo Alto side or the Menlo Park side, that's the, quote, that was the non-Black side. It was at least $100,000 or so higher. And, on the other side, a little bit more rundown, a little different. All you have to do is go over there and see it for yourself. But that's like one example of how the freeway was built in order to separate communities. And so we don't have to look too far in our own backyard to see certain things that were done. And so, what about it? So were there long-term effects, right? Of course there were. Okay. And so today, you see incomes of even African Americans, they average about, 60% of average white incomes, right? But African American wealth is about 5% of white wealth. So most middle-class families in the country, they gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. And if you didn't know, now you know, Yes, it's the truth. That's one of the fastest ways. And I've talked about this before. One of the fastest ways to build wealth is by home ownership or land ownership, right? But there's this difference that, you have between, white and black. It's between a 60% income ratio and a 5% wealth ratio. Basically, it's almost entirely attributed to federal housing policies that were implemented through the 20th century. And that's pretty much fact. Anything that you read on with regards to the laws that were established, it's fact. African-American families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 1940s and 50s, and even into the 60s by the FHA administration, gained none of the equity appreciation that their counterparts, whites had gained. So let's keep it at home, right? So the Daly Sidley development south of San Francisco or Levittown or any of the others in between across the country, those homes in the late 1940s and 1950s, they sold for about twice national median income. A lot of money, right? They were affordable to working class families with an FHA or VA mortgage, but African Americans were equally able to afford those homes as whites, but were prohibited from buying them. So yeah, you could, yay, but but you can't. You can afford it, but you can't buy it because of the redlining. And today, those homes sell for, guys, a ridiculously amount, 6-8 times the national median income. So go figure. If you got into it at a low price point, and now it's 6-8 times the national median. So go figure where that wealth is going to be distributed, right? So that's one of the reasons why. So in 1968, we passed the Fair Housing Act, and what I talked about in my last podcast. And that said, in effect, that, African Americans, Black people, you are now free to buy homes in the Daly City or, Levittown area. But it was kind of an empty promise because those homes are no longer affordable to the families that could have actually afforded them when the whites were buying them in the suburbs and gaining the equity and wealth that followed from that. So it's like, yeah, okay, thank you. You passed the fair housing law, but now it's far out of our reach and we can't afford it. And, what happens when you have wealth with these particular homes? Certain families, different white families, actually non-Black, right? They were able to send their children to college with the home equity. And a lot of them did that. And they were able to take care of the parents at old age and not have to depend on their children. They could, bequeath wealth to their children. And a lot of those areas, none of those advantages were accrued to African Americans who, for the most part, were prohibited from buying homes in those suburbs. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and I'm probably going to have a part 2 next, just to kind of say, let's talk a little bit more about this, because I think it's really a topic of information. And I think it would help people in understanding where do we go from here, and why are things the way that they are. So stay tuned for part 2 next week. I really appreciate you tuning in with me. And, any questions, comments, concerns, you can hit me up at TamikaEllsworth.com or number 408-561-7922. I really appreciate, just the input or the feedback. And I hope this has blessed you. I hope this has opened up your mind. Again, the book that I was just talking about, it's a really good read, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, The Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. So all you knowledge seekers, go ahead and seek it out. But again, this is Tamika Ellsworth with Faith in Homebuying, and I'm loving kind of equipping people with faith for the home buying process. Thank you so much.